is TV18 and you're watching CNBC TV18.
Facing questions over the credibility of official economic data, the government has decided to set up a 28-member panel to overhaul the system for reviewing economic statistics. Now, this move comes just months after a group of 180 economists and social scientists wrote an open letter raising questions of political interference in statistics. They also appealed against what they called a tendency to suppress uncomfortable data. Interestingly, 3 people who were signatories to that letter have also been roped into this panel. What's more, the panel will be headed by the former Chief Statistician of India, Dr. Pronab Sen, who has been critical of some of the decisions taken. Before we start discussing what this new committee will look at, let me bring in Latha to understand why this panel needs to be set up. Latha, over the last several months, once these questions have arisen about the GDP data, what happened with the NSSO report and so on and so forth, a lot of independent economists and people of influence have said that the government should bring in experts, outside independent experts, to restore credibility to Indian data. And that certainly seems to be the effort with this panel.
Well, it may be an answer to the questions raised by economists in March. It could be also an independent decision because the composition of GDP is constantly changing. Technology is disrupting the old methods of collecting data, which is more tilted towards manufacturing, whereas a large part of the output is being generated in services. So it could also have come because of extraneous factors or the sheer evolution of the economy. I'm also pointing to this because of the terms of reference. The terms of reference do not allude to any questions about integrity of the CSO, but it's speaking more about looking at modification to the ASI, the Annual Survey of Industries, which is done by the CSO, the Annual Service of the Services Sector Enterprises. There is a lot of emphasis on services, time use survey, index of service production. So it's possible that one of the reasons for the setting up of this committee is also to perhaps find out data sources for this hitherto less attended to area of economic activity, which is the services sector. But it is very difficult to avoid the impression that the integrity of the method of collection of statistics, the method of revision, and the sudden way in which certain important data are not released, especially when they are not very flattering to the economic growth, like, for instance, the periodic labor survey, and more lately, the consumer survey data, which also was not released. So it is tempting to believe that the government wants to, make a clean breast of it, call in a set of experts who would be above board. So it does look like it's both, to perhaps cover up hitherto uncovered areas of statistics, as well to remove any doubts.
Absolutely. And to help us understand what the way forward is, joining us now is Dr. Pronab Sen, Chairman of the Standing Committee on Economic Statistics, Hema Swaminathan, Professor at IIM Bangalore, also a member of this committee, PC Mohanan, the former Chairman at the National Statistical Commission, and Mr. R. Nagaraj, Professor at the Indira Gandhi Institute of Development Research. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks very much for joining us here on the program. Dr. Sen, let me start by asking you, sir, the government has appointed this committee. MOSPI has issued the order. It is now a Gazette notification. Can you take us through, and I understand that the first meeting is going to be on the 7th of January. Can you take us through what the emphasis is going to be on? Is it going to be to try and look at areas where concerns have been raised? And of course, we're looking at the various surveys that this committee will look into. Can you give us some color on what the effort of this committee will be to do?
Well, if you actually think about it, most of the items that have been listed in the order and in the notification are activities that were already pretty much in existence. Either they were already happening or they were in the process of happening. For each of these data sets, there were working committees that were going into the production issues.
Yeah.
Now, the reason that this has happened is, to my mind, is still not very clear. But if I simply look at what has happened, it's that all these working committees have been melded into this one standing committee. So I would imagine that the principal function of the standing committee would be to integrate and coordinate between different forms of economic statistics, to see whether or not there are overlaps, to see whether or not there are discrepancies in the definitions and methodologies used, and to essentially clean up the sort of the source of the data and the way the data is collected. So it's
Okay.
I don't think it's so much about the data quality. It is looking at the methodologies, looking at definitions, looking at whether or not there are overlaps, whether they're getting contradictions, issues of that kind.
If I may just come in on what you said, sir. You said this is not so much about data quality, but more about cleaning up, especially when it comes to the source of data. And as you pointed out, that there were several committees that were looking into each of these aspects. So should we assume now that you will start afresh, beyond just the integration and the merging of all of these committees into one large 28-member committee? Are we to understand that the whole process of evaluating these various surveys will start afresh?
Well, I think it would have to happen in two stages. The first stage would be that, look, all of this data is already being collected, and you do need to have the working committee oversight function continuing, because these are ongoing data sets. So that's going to have to continue. And a part of the work of this committee would be to ensure that it continues without disruption. The second part of it is then to actually go into each of the data sets and ask the question whether or not these are consistent with the others. Are there discrepancies? Are there overlaps? Are there gaps which need to be filled? But that, I imagine, would be the second step.
Okay. Dr. Sen, I'm just coming back to you. Dr. Mohanan, you have read the Gazette notification, I assume. What have you made of this new committee?
See, as Dr. Sen just now said, all these have been under committees have been looking at these different surveys that is listed in the order. So it's not a new thing that, but it's a mother of all committees, a large committee of all these people. But what is not clear to me is to whom will the committee report? The recommendations of the committee, who will accept the reports or recommendations, and how such a large committee can function on such a variety of surveys unless they make subcommittees and split into smaller groups. So all these are likely to be Dr. Sen will have to decide all these things, how are they going to do it. But my main concern is it's not very clear from the order which I just now read as to whom will they submit the recommendations.
Okay, I got that.
And what is the role of NSC? Because there is a National Statistical Commission recently set up. So what would be the role of NSC? Is this committee above the NSC or parallel to NSC? I mean, that's not very clear.
Okay. I'm tempted to toss all these questions to Dr. Sen right away. But before that, maybe there will be more questions from the other members in this panel. Hema Swaminathan, how have you interpreted this Gazette?
Well, I thought the scope was a little unclear at first and also very broad. And so I guess because it is so broad, I wasn't quite sure. So I was really looking forward to the January 7th meeting to figure out what exactly we should be doing. And I think there is a fair representation from sort of different areas of expertise and different domains. So my own sense was that maybe people have been called because each one represents a particular strength. So I think we'll have to see what Professor Sen has in mind, and we'll have to figure out a way to work together.
Yes, I would imagine that Professor Sen will put the house in order, so to speak. In fact, the Gazette notification does say that the Standing Committee may constitute different subcommittees comprising of subjects experts, just to the point that Mr. Mohanan had made. So yes, the committee can go into setting up subcommittees as well. But Mr. Nagaraj, before we get Dr. Sen to answer some of those questions, let me ask you, sir, as Hema pointed out, and I think Dr. Sen alluded to that as well, the scope is very very, very broad. And I would imagine that once the committee meets, you will need to refine what areas of emphasis and focus ought to be going forward. What would you suggest? Where do you see the gaps? What do you believe needs fixing?
Yeah, I've been thinking about it ever since I saw the news item on Saturday in the Indian Express. What is not clear to me is what are the terms of reference of this committee? What is it expected to do? From what Dr. Sen said, I can see that he probably looks at how the different data sets can be made to work together. Because already, to my knowledge, there are working groups and standing committees for different sets of statistics. Like you have a standing committee for industrial statistics. There is a separate standing committee or a working group for employment statistics. So how this committee, again consisting of a large number of people, 28 of them, how will this work with the existing committees? It is not clear. Or is it that the existing committees stand dissolved and this committee will overtake them? Or as was mentioned, whom does this committee report to? Does it report to National Statistical Commission or to the Secretary Statistics? Those things are not clear.
Well, actually,
so I think what is the purpose? What is it expected to do? Is still to be figured out. I think as Dr. Sen said, my guess is that it will be more of coordinating and ironing out the overlaps and differences in these various sets of statistics.
Actually,
but there are far too many of them there. In fact, I was listing there are at least 10 of them.
Yeah, Mr. Nagaraj, actually, why don't we let
so
Dr. Sen answer?
What will it come out? It's still not very clear.
Yeah, why don't we let Dr. Sen answer that question? Sir, have you been told whom you will present your recommendations to?
No, I think there is a lack of clarity in this, but I'm fairly clear in my mind what the notification says, and this is in answer to Mr. Nagaraj's point, is that the existing working groups and standing committees are essentially being disbanded and merged with this one. So this particular committee is taking on all of those responsibilities. Which then directly leads me to the point that Dr. Mohanan made, which is there's no way we can handle that without setting up subcommittees. 28 members running different data sets is simply impossible. Having said this, and this part of it out, the real issue here, and this is something we will have to discuss in committee, is that it makes very little sense in having a unified committee which then breaks out into a bunch of subcommittees and then it becomes business as usual. It simply defeats the purpose of this exercise, right? So there will have to be an amalgamation between a unified structure and subcommittees which are looking at individual data sets, right? Now, how we work this out is a question which will be discussed in committee.
Dr. Sen,
the real question is, who do we report?
Yes, sir.
And the answer to that is, I see this essentially as a substitute for all the current working groups and committees, which means that we report to the NSO. We are, to my mind, we are purely on the production side of data. The NSC continues and should continue to be the last word on quality, on standards, and on the integrity of the system. I don't think that is the responsibility of this committee.
So actually, you took away a part of my next question, which was exactly what Dr. Mohanan raised. I mean, there have been integrity questions with the government not allowing certain data to be released. The PLSI data, the periodic labor survey data, as well as the more recent consumer survey data. Your committee will not be questioning this or trying to put safeguards to ensure that these questions of integrity are not raised?
There are two parts to it. One is integrity in the process of data collection and putting together of the data sets. And the second is the question of integrity in the release of the data. I do not think that this committee should be getting into the release part of it. That is the domain and prerogative of the NSC.
Okay. So you're saying that, Dr. Sen, you're saying that this committee should not get into the business of deciding what data should be released, when it should be released, what is the appropriate timing, etc. That's for the NSC. But Mr. Mohanan, back to you, sir, because, you know, part of the stated objective of the government was to strengthen the NSC itself. In fact, MOSPI was looking at bringing in the National Statistical Commission bill to strengthen the and institutionalize the NSC framework. Do you believe that that may perhaps get pushed back with the setting up of this committee, even though Dr. Sen believes that the NSC should be the final word?
Yeah, I don't think so, because most of the surveys or activities that is now in the TOR of this committee, they're all ongoing things. They're not new things. What this committee will perhaps do will be to give an integrated view and produce linkages between one survey and the other survey, and to the national accounts and other macro aggregates. But the NSC bill, there are a lack of clarity in the NSC bill also, because a draft bill, I don't want to comment on that myself. But there are certain extent of the relation between the NSC and the government. These are not very clear in the draft bill. Just as it's not very clear to me how this committee is related to the ministry proper. It will be something which we have to see how the committee. So, but outwardly, I would say that if the committee is able to integrate these activities and give a integrated framework for all these data collection exercises, because ultimately all this goes into the national accounts and to that extent, the committee will be welcome thing. But as again, I repeat that it's not very clear to me the relation between this committee and the government, and this committee and the NSC, and the draft bill which is proposed for NSC, and how that will interact with the government. These are not very clear in this.
Yes. Yes, those questions I think everyone on this panel is seeking answers to, including the chairman of the committee. But Hema, let me come to you. You know, what is it? The first meeting is on the 7th of January. What to your mind, and you know, I'm looking at again, it's a long list of things that this committee has been asked to look at to review the extant framework relating to data sources, indicators, concepts, definitions, and other issues, and to suggest suitable modification wherever required with respect to the annual survey of service sector, periodic labor force, time use survey, index of service production, index of industrial production. I mean, it's just a long list of asks that this committee has been tasked with. Of these items, Hema, what do you believe should be given priority?
What should be given priority? Well, I think all of us on this committee, probably apart from, I think, wanting, we are all consumers. I've been a consumer of NSS data, but now if we are also thinking of producing this data, then I have a particular research angle, a particular research agenda. And one, I think, would be first to strengthen the labor force surveys. Then I would want to look at time use data. For me, I think labor force statistics are very key, very integral. So I think I've been thinking about that for a while, and maybe some lacuna. So I would list out, I think, working with the labor force surveys, ensuring that it's more regular, and thinking about this rotational panel, how that's going to come out, time use surveys. I'm very big on ensuring that we also get disaggregated data. Many years ago, I've had a conversation with Professor Sen on this, on trying to get at individual level data. So I think we are going to have to see. I think as a committee, we are going to have to decide on priorities. Like, obviously, I think all of us, many of us are academicians. You put 5 different academics and we are all going to have our own individual priorities, right? Yes. So we are going to have to sit down together and see what makes sense and see which priority to address first. But certainly, I think for me, it's also very important to think about methodology and innovation in methodology in our data collection. And NSS has been at the forefront of it for many years, and I'd like to push that envelope further.
Okay. I will actually have 2 quick questions for Dr. Sen. Sir, today, the Niti Aayog chairman has announced that they're going to set up a behavioral change unit, which is going to be advised by no less a person than the Nobel laureate Richard Thaler. That looks like another committee now and another exercise in data. Is this complementary? Is this contradicting, or is this confusing?
No, you see, as far as the behavioral economic part of it is concerned, most of that, those are based on really micro studies.
Okay.
So there's no fundamental contradiction that happens.
Okay.
Right? Now, what would be nice is if we could, say, figure out ways of marrying some of these micro studies with the bigger picture, because a whole bunch of micro studies can actually end up looking like a sample survey.
Okay.
That would be an interesting exercise, and one would really wish that we could work.
Maybe expand and enrich the scope of your own committee. The other thing I wanted to ask you is, you said that definitely the integrity of data collection and data interpretation will be the job of this committee of yours. Now, in that case, what about all that backcasting? No, one of the major integrity questions raised was the way in which the data got backcast, the GDP data, thanks to the new base year, seemed to have a political tilt to it. So, should we expect a new GDP series, backcast series?
No, I don't think you should.
Okay.
That is the function of the NSO. I see this committee as ensuring that the NSO has the right kind of data.
Okay.
What the NSO does with it is the domain of the NSC. NSC sits above the NSO.
Okay.
This committee, to my understanding, reports to the NSO.
Okay.
So I see our job as making sure we get the right kind of data of the right quality. What the NSO does with it is between the NSO and the NSC.
Okay. Okay. I'm Dr. Nagaraj, you have in the past raised a lot of questions about the way in which, with the new base year, the data was put out for 2012-13, 13-14, the way in which the demonetization year saw an 8.2% GDP growth, as well as the backcasting. Would you want this committee to get into that? What would your ask be of this committee on GDP itself?
From what I could make out, GDP is not included in the data sets referred to this committee. GDP is kept out of it. So I guess there is already there's a committee on national account statistics. So I think that will look after it. So my impression is that this committee will look after all economic statistics other than GDP or other than the national accounts. So therefore, there is no overlap between this committee and the National Accounts Advisory Committee.
Yes, you're right. It's not there as part of the TOR. Before we end, then, Dr. Sen, two quick questions. What's the agenda for the first meeting on the 7th of January, sir? And what is the timeline that we're looking at? Because, again, there's about 8 different kinds of surveys, etc., that the committee has been asked to review. What is the broad timeline that we're looking at?
Well, in terms of time, work plan is something that we're going to have to chalk out collectively in the first meeting. But as far as timelines are concerned, I think we need to be very clear. There's a large number of the items which have been specifically mentioned in the notification are ongoing activities, and we will have to move very quickly on setting up subcommittees to oversee them. That shouldn't take that long. There are some which are on the card, such as the annual survey of unincorporated enterprises and the annual survey statistics and the index of statistics of service production. These are new. How we handle them is something we will have to discuss. So we will have to take it step by step. First priority will be to ensure that the ongoing data collection processes are not disrupted in any manner.
Okay. Okay. All right, sir. We will check back in with you and your committee members post that meeting on the 7th of January. But thanks very much for joining us, Hema Swaminathan, PC Mohanan, R. Nagaraj and Dr. Sen, for joining us to give us a sense of what we should expect from this new standing committee, 28-member standing committee that has been set up by the government to overhaul and review the framework of economic data related to several surveys. With that, it is time for us to wrap up the CNBC TV 18 special. We'll take a quick break. There's a lot more coming up. Don't go anywhere.